All right. Welcome everyone and good afternoon on our final day of the first annual Gale Conference. My name is Jess Diatri. I'm a research and instruction librarian at Babson College outside of Boston. I'll be the moderator for this session today. Before we begin, just a couple quick reminders. So we do have a code of conduct for the conference that we're asking everyone to follow. And I'll put a link to that in the chat right now. If you have any issues related to conduct or anything else with the conference, please send us an email to genainlibraries@gmail.com. As you mentioned, for those of you who are here a few minutes ago, we are in webinar format today. So you're starting off muted with no video, but if you do want to ask a question at the end, and we'll wait for questions at the end, we can unmute you from our side. You can also put questions in the Q&A section or in the chat throughout the presentation. I'll do my best to stay on top of those so we can answer them as many as we can at the end. This session is being recorded, so you can go back and view it later, and also so you know, as we're going on today. If you want to enable captions, you can click on the captions button at the bottom, or the more option. The three dots should have captions, and then show captions if you like those. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter for this session. Our presenter is Elle Dimopoulos. She's the Accessibility and OER Coordinator at the College of Marin, and she'll be talking to us today about reframing participants as co-creators during one-shot instruction using AI tools. So please join me in welcoming Elle.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, noon, or night. Let me get my screen share started. And just a little note before we begin, I am coming off of some eye surgery, so when I'm sharing my screen, I might turn my camera off just so we can facilitate bandwidth and also give my eyes a little bit of a break. With that, let me go ahead and share my screen and get started here. All right, so everybody should see the title page, and then as our fabulous moderator has already introduced me, the session is Whose Information Is It? Information Literacy Through the Lens of AI. And following that, this is a very brief introduction. I'm sure you've already had a lot of background and grounding in Gen AI and AI in general, but I'll give you my spin on it, as well as a little bit about the sociology of information behavior. And so how that interacts with how I do one-shots and work with students and faculty as an embedded librarian, you will see. So this webinar and this session is really all about faculty and student framing. You know, the PII, harms and risks, thinking about bias and equity in the data pipeline, accessibility and assistive communication, AI tools as extensions, not replacements, and co-creation in the research and writing process. So I designed it to be a little modular, so you can take what you want and include it into your processes if you like. But to start off, I always like to introduce one of my favorite challenges from both undergrad and grad school. It's the Gettier problem. I'm not sure if anybody has a background in philosophy, but I'll give you the 2-minute elevator pitch for it. So the Gettier problem states that following the expectations of a reasonable person that has a belief that a clock is working, one could also infer from past experience that the clock is accurate. Maybe it's a clock I've used before. Maybe I've looked outside and, oh yeah, it's about that general time, and I've examined the world. One could have a justified true belief that the clock is working, but it also could be broken. It also could be lucky that the clock just happens to be correct, right? So if it's an analog clock and it is broken at the top of the hour, and it just happens to be the top of the hour, well, one can say that I have a belief that I know the time, but I don't have knowledge of the time, right? So how this relates to AI is, when is a probabilistic guess made from a data set knowledge? What does an AI model, app, or API know? What do we mean when we say we know something? These are all good questions that I like to pose students when we're starting off our session together. Kind of gets them thinking. And sometimes I get a response, well, so what? What's all? I was told there would be no philosophy or math in this one shot, right? So, and why so what is tools can extend our reach, but they can also enable users to do without knowing. And of course, depending on the model, weights, and use case, AI is fantastic at probabilistic compute. And even with greater frequency and regularity, sentiment analysis. So thinking about the right tool for the right job, right? The right software, the right AI for the right task. AIs are usually good at making lists, synthesizing data, sorting data. If anybody has tried to program a bubble sort and use parallel processing, you know what I'm talking about. They're also really good at the aforementioned parallel processing and raw compute. People are, in contrast, usually good at meaning making through context about the world and lived experiences, as well as communication and transmission of knowledge, models, and values. So here is an abbreviated list of things that kind of make you go, hmm. Now, I always tell students and faculty during flex sessions, when you're evaluating a tool, and I do a lot of evaluations as part of my role as the accessibility point of contact for my college and various other community colleges, looking at VPATs and accessibility rubrics. This is very helpful for those type of technology tools and platforms, but it's also helpful for AI. So is there a paid option? Because, if it's free, you're probably the product. Is it easy and secure to make, manage, and delete your account data? Your canceling should not give you flashbacks to, past gym memberships. So where is the data located? Right? Is it located in the US, in other countries? Depending on which country you're located in geographically, as well as where that data is located in, different kind of privacy and protection policies and processes apply to you, right? And who are the partners they're sharing it with, right? For example, is that information easily accessible in a privacy policy, right? So, do they conform to FERPA if you're looking at working with college students, or if do they conform to, let's say, GDPR, for example, right? And if not only do they as a company do that, depending on where they are, but what about their partners, right? Are they opt in or opt out of services in privacy policies with sharing your data? And how many times when they redo their interface do they flip that switch back over to opt in? A really quick point of note here. I would always say check your integrations. I always remind my students that Microsoft schools, I work at one of them, can, but not always, default to protected mode for ChatGPT if you use it within, the Microsoft browser, for instance. You'll notice a little shield up in the top right with your login information, and it'll usually give you some such notice about, hey, you're in a protected sandbox, right? However far that goes, that's kind of up to you. Now, partnership and data broker loopholes. Well, this is a fun one that I expand upon in my data privacy lectures, but just for the sake of brevity, there's, and we're speaking, of course, of the states, United States and California, where I'm geographically based, is that your tool and the company that is offering you the tool, let's say OpenAI or Microsoft or any of the other 5,000 tools that you've probably already seen today, they might have a partnership with some other folks in managing or securing your data. And if they are a partner and they don't actually sell that data, um, there are different guidelines and legal standards apply to partners versus somebody who's going to actually sell that to a data broker. Unfortunately, there's a lot of loopholes where you can have a partner, give that partner your data, and then buy it back through a third party as a data broker. That's a little known fact for folks who are like, oh yeah, they have a great privacy policy, but who are they sharing that data with, right? So keep in mind when you're using these tools, what the privacy policy is and who their partners are. And also, you always want to keep in mind the garbage in, garbage out bias and where are they getting the training data, right? Because it could be exploitative. This could be a number of things, right? Where, they're training on data sets from folks in the developing world, or they're in a gray area for copyright issues, or, they're not, housing their data in um, green energy, server farms, whatever the case may be. Really think about what kind of training data and do they spell it out? That's always a good one. Um, I haven't seen a lot of folks actually spell out what training data and data sets they're actually using, because obviously, if you're not using your own model or a free model, but you've rolled your own, there's not a lot of transparency there. So going back to our conceptual grounding for a minute, consider who and how the tool is thinking for you. Are you the product or the process? And again, an example I like to use is, let's say we're taking a trip to a museum or an art gallery, virtual or otherwise, right? Maybe we see a glass display case with a painting, sculpture, or let's say a helmet from World War I. It's located in a side hallway, or we might even have a direct link to it virtually. And the exhibit card or the metadata just has the title. Now imagine we are visiting a different collection on a separate trip. Maybe it's a different day. When we see the work, it has a title, a bit of background, is situated inside of a larger collection, and has a personal story that you can hear by scanning maybe a QR code for an audio tour, directly downloaded from your phone, or if you went old school and you remember those, headphones that you can borrow from some of those museums and have a little audio tour, or you can even ask a docent, right? So later we discover that the output of these works were the same. Perhaps the museum curators were in competition with each other, and they came down with a critical case of FOMO. But in any case, they were reproduced, maybe 3D printed, maybe they're digitally identical. what have you. So I asked the students, what's the difference, right? If it's technically the same, but one is separated from its context and there's some meaning created behind that. Maybe there's a personal story, maybe thinking back to the World War I helmet. Part of the exhibit is this was a helmet that somebody used, and they had a letter or some thoughts and wishes to their family written inside of it, right? Well, what if that was just a reproduction or a replica? How does that shift our perspective about authenticity? So here is a quick break. I know that was a lot of heavy uh, grounding information for us before we even get to any tools. So I just wanted to put this out there. I really like this image. This is from a Dolly prompt for fancy OER textbook with text gradient backgrounds. So in the interest of like location, 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 try to iterate when you're using these tools, because just like when you're doing the research process, you're not always going to get the right information on your first attempt. And even if it seems right, either in a prompt or in a Google search or in any kind of research endeavor, but especially with Gen AI tools, you should try to iterate on your process. And then sometimes I'll do an exercise in class where we go back and we do the same prompt over again and see what kind of results we get. 9 times out of 10, we are getting different results at different sources. So you always want to be comparing what those tools are generating and what they're giving you, because again, they're probabilistic models. So that clock might be right, even if you get lucky twice a day. Another thing that I think that is not talked about often enough when we're thinking about AI tools and tools in general is the piece about access and accessibility. So the pace and progress of accessible technology, assistive technology, has grown exponentially in the last few years. And that's really because of all the AI integration. Now, for some of us, we've been using AI for a long time. Maybe we didn't know it, but anytime you use a screen reader, Dragon Naturally Speaking, Kurzweil, anytime you use YouTube auto captions, remember how great they were about not even 5 years ago, and look how good they are now. Same could be said for when we first all started using Zoom with the auto captions, and now I think they're pretty good. Um, that also includes things that touches lots of different areas, like even a recommendation or your Netflix queue, for example. So again, listing some of the uses, captions, meeting note takers, study guide makers, right? I use a lot of the tools to generate study guides for students. I also show faculty how to generate study guides so they can vet it themselves and also use it as an example in their classroom for their specific discipline and train it on maybe the textbooks and the materials that they're using for that semester. It's great for English as a second learner support. So getting those, building those language skills and really whatever language you want to learn, screen readers, navigation, right? Dialogue and audio description. I don't know if you have seen some of the options and some of the streaming platforms recently, but sometimes if it's a very recent film or series, you can go up to the options, and in the audio, there's actually right next to the caption a little section that says enhanced dialogue, right? So that's using AI to turn the volume down on all the sound effects in the background and turn the volume up and make the dialogue clearer. It is also good for facilitating communication with neurospicy students and community members. As a neurospicy person myself, I find this very helpful, and I know a lot of students I work with who are on the spectrum find this helpful as well. Here's a just one example of a tool that we've also been using. Um, and this was recommended to me by a student a few years ago. And there's an app for your phone. We know students primarily use their phone as their primary communication tool now. But Goblin Tools is pretty interesting. It's been around for a while, but and you will see it has some of the options there at the top, but one I really like is tone analysis called the judge, right? So if you're thinking about, well, what if I want to send an email to a professor, or maybe I have anxiety and I want to reach out for help and support to some of the student services, but I don't know how that email is going to come across. Or maybe I'm working with my peers on a group project, and I want to just double check it to make sure that I am really getting the sentiment across, right? Thinking back to our sentiment analysis piece. So here's a little cheeky sentence that I put in if I'm pretending I'm sending an email to a website that has isn't accessible. And you can see the judge has appropriately judged it suboptimal. Right? And it expressed disappointments, and it could come off mocking and disrespectful instead of snarky and uh, a little cheeky. So we also want to think about, yes, we primarily are focused on, and I think this is part of the what our students are using a lot of these days because it's integrated into everything. I think there's going to come a time very shortly where there's not going to be a difference between an AI tool and just a tool because most tools will have AI built into them in some form or another, right? But thinking about how we start to process and conceptualize these tools and integrate them into our processes. So summarizing is a spectrum. Here's another tool. We're in the tools section now. It's very handy for lectures and discussions. I think there's a sliding scale here, especially when you're thinking about long lectures. For example, here's some of the examples that they listed. Theory of Relativity lecture at Stanford. I'd love to get a summary of that. Unless I'm a physicist, I probably don't want to sit through a 3-hour lecture on the theory of relativity, as it's a science-based course. It's very factual. So the summary will probably be pretty good because it's really distilling it down to the facts and really giving me a breakdown. I didn't include it in this screenshot, but the output is in 2 parts. One, it gives a basic summary. It's usually a few sentence paragraphs. And there's a little option that says, want to see more? And then there's time codes, right? Where it'll list out all of the sections, especially if it's a long video, in different summaries for kind of each 15-minute section. Try it on your own YouTube videos or your lectures. For example, like SciShow is the popular one I use as a demo. But it does we're now moving along the spectrum here, does strip out a lot of that context, nuance, and meaning making. When we're thinking about maybe it's a discussion heavy class, maybe it's a class that is maybe not so rooted in um, theory, right? Maybe it's an art class. Perhaps that tool isn't the right tool for that class, right? As you can see, right under the theory of relativity lecture at Stanford example, there's also Steve Vai documentary. And it got me thinking, would we want to use a summary tool for something that is talking story, right? Something that's really trying to connect us with that human lived experience? Probably not. I wouldn't use it for that. I don't know if anybody has used or watched the new Talking Heads documentary. Fantastic. Recommend it. I think it's streaming now. Um, Also, some other genres you might use it for, poetry or literary fiction. Now, my thought is perhaps I wouldn't use a summary tool for these types of videos. I tell my students, and why is that? Well, the whole point of watching that documentary, reading that poetry, listening to that literary fiction is to really connect with that context, nuance, and meaning making of somebody's lived experience, whether it be the author or the reader, right? An example might be, well, if you're listening to somebody's documentary, um, summarizing it might be akin to thinking about their autobiography as just a list of facts like a CV. That probably is not the output that you're looking for. So again, thinking about the right tool for the right job. I also try to include, you know, thinking back to our museum example, context, nuance, meaning making. If you're putting together a grocery list, for example, and or you're doing a quick assignment, you might feel free and comfortable just throwing it into a AI powered tool to summarize something, whether it be video or not. But think about if you wrote a creative fiction piece or you did a short assignment that was based on lived experience in a short fiction or short nonfiction class. And you're developing that writing, the skill through writing and writing as a process, writing as thinking, you probably wouldn't want to use a summarize piece of technology or a summarize app because it's going to just strip out all the meaning for you, right? And think about how you would feel if somebody did that to your work and they're missing all of the nuance that you put into it. So just something to chew on. Getting more along the lines into the last of the tools section. I won't go into too many tools here because I'm sure we've all had a lot of examples today and during this wonderful conference already. But this is a tool I like to use and point students to because it's a really good easy button for making your own custom language model, right? I always, with a caveat, I always say, you can have quick, private, or free. Pick one, right? Also consider the availability of this tool. It's in experimental mode right now, but if people know Google, they, as it's a Google tool, they have a habit of abandoning their tools. So how long this lasts, who knows? If you highlight the little icon, this little window pops up, which is very interesting and what I draw my students towards. especially the last part, please refrain from submitting any information that you would not want a human reviewer to see, or don't post anything to the internet that you wouldn't want your grandparents to see, right? That old strategy. AI is still the Wild West, but this is maybe a little bit of a Wild West with a Kevlar vest. And you can also consider other apps, APIs, and extensions in this space. But what I like about this tool is you can easily upload your textbooks, especially if they're OER, and you're thinking about, oh, I can jump into my LMS, download my OER and all my assignments or reading material, and it allows you to easily check or deselect any of the sources you are being trained on. It also gives you that familiar interface about saving little notes, just like a notebook, right? Sorry, this is a little small on the screenshot, but I'll get to that in a second. Um, this also includes prompt tutorials, has a familiar UI for students. Most students have a Google account. It's really useful for creating custom dialogic chatbots. Say if you have something that's in the public domain, like the entirety of the works of Socrates, you can upload it and have a conversation with Socrates, right? I feel that's a great example of um, a dialogue that you can use to study with and bounce ideas off of. It also, again, includes an easy way to have a source selection and for transparency. One thing I want to point you to, I'm not sure if you can see it, but you'll see that some of the words in the left-hand pane are highlighted. Well, that's directly quoted from the source guide. If you go over to the left or the right side, you'll see that there's little numbers at the end of those text study guides, and those directly correlate to where the language model is pulling that from, right? So this gives you a bit of insight into how language models work and building those soft skills, looking at transparency. It's one of the only tools that I know that does this, where you can click a button and then it'll automatically go and highlight to where it pulled it from the source text. So you can compare. This is a great way to also look at the text in context, right? Building those contextual clues, lateral reading strategies. And I typically use it in combinations with other tools like Semantic Scholar, again, for those lateral reading um, skill building exercises. Thinking back to some of the AI activities that I like to use in class. One thing I always find is a big hit is looking at a tool. I would obviously ask for consent before you do this, but breaking the tool, right? It works very well in demonstrations. It's pretty easy to do once you can cut, copy, and paste some prompts that work already. And there's links to some of the easy ways and methods and modalities that you can do that at the bottom. I find that's very helpful because it also shows students or your audience how great and effective and useful a tool is, but also how flawed the tool is, right? I often hear the oh no kind of moments from either faculty or students when they break a tool and very quickly. Usually my one shots are only an hour, but this could be a great exercise. And read the room, obviously, but as you're getting to the end of any of your sessions, I always like to think back to the kind of saying that Tools are great facilitators of creativity, not only in developing the prompts, but also in their design, but is also a poor artist that relies and blames their tools.
Sorry to
So
interrupt, Elle, but just got about 10 minutes left in the session.
perfect, thank you. That's what I have on my clock too. Here's a little bit. Again, you can, if you have time, to inject this into any of your demos, but I think this is super interesting because I'm also a Go player. Um, Historically, AlphaGo was beat or beat a professional Go player without a handicap on a full-size board in October 2015. So that was a while ago, right? It's only improved since then. However, it can still be beaten by using a poisoning strategy. Because most general models don't have any context. They don't actually know anything about the world. Um, and a little bit about that strategy is you can read the poisoning paper at the link at the bottom. But in general, you play it not algorithmically, but you um, play erratically until the last few hands, which then you can capitalize on the algorithms' lack of awareness of the contextual elements of the entire board. So how this works is this strategy doesn't typically work on human players, right? Because most professional Go players wouldn't use this because we have knowledge about the world. We can see that we're playing not only a game, but we're also playing in person, right? Ranked players typically play both, but AlphaGo algorithms, they are only looking at probabilistic choices for their next move. Up. Getting into something a little bit more fun if you're not a Go player is you can also use these types of poisoning intertext to deflect from having AI pick you up from using visual recognition, right? Not only is this great from a security standpoint and a learning standpoint, but also from an equity and a bias standpoint, right? There's a lot of literature, if you look at the Algorithmic Justice League, where webcams and algorithms who are trained on typically Western, typically white faces, don't pick them up as well on webcams and are using, if you're using like Face ID, for example, right? I thought this was pretty interesting that if you print certain patterns onto a t-shirt, that it won't detect you. This other top I think is pretty cute. This registers you as 80% non-person, right? I think this actually registers you as one top is a giraffe, another is a dog. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Although I don't know if I would pay what they're asking for. I think that's another equity issue. I think it retails for like $500. And I teach at a community college, so that's probably not in my price range, right? But also, it's a great example to, again, re-engage students with something that might be more tangible. So here are some more resources and readings in no particular order. Some of the things I've used for this guide and just in general. Again, links to the Algorithmic Justice League. Joy's TED Talk on fighting bias in algorithms is a great one to listen to, and I always assign it if I'm teaching a information literacy class, or it's short enough to even use in one shot. Teaching with AI just came out, which is I think pretty good. Thinking about larger aspects of how we need to reframe assessment, in the knowledge that these tools are going to be coming and become even more integrated. And here's just a list of tools that I have listed in the past. I'm sure I didn't want this presentation to be just a whole bunch of slides of tools and demos. I wanted to give more of a kind of conceptual framework that you can perhaps use in your own work. But here's my requisite tool list. The notebook from Google. Hemingway app is pretty good for students, and um, uh, it's a great way to cut the clutter while you're trying to write. A lot of students I know who have maybe ADD or ADHD use it. Same with like Ulysses and a lot of other Markdown editors that have AI tools built into them. Summarize Tech is a quick video summary tool. Perplexity, Magic School AI. I know there was a session, a couple of sessions already that mentioned Magic School. Adify is a extension. Keep in mind when you're using extensions in your web browser, um, if they don't adhere to the privacy policy that they say they're going to do, they can track where you go across the internet as long as the extension's active and you give them rights to it. Kotlin tools obviously genius. And here are some really good, interesting. I know I said in my abstract that no Hugging Face experience was required, but if you really want to get into rolling your own model, looking at some of the open source ones that have freely available training data in weights, here's something that's really cool that I thought was interesting, called Dolly. I don't hear that mentioned a lot. That kind of fits in with the OER, open pedagogy aspect of things. So hopefully I'm borrowing from Melanie's triangle of open pedagogy and learning here. Hopefully you've at least touched on some of the first layer frameworks and foundations. You understand a little bit more about AI. Maybe you even got to that second level. You can use and apply AI, especially alongside all the other presentations that you've seen in this wonderful conference already. Maybe you've got some background and you can use some cross-training to analyze and evaluate AI tools. Maybe you've done evaluations for other tools in the past. And if you're really adventurous, you can go out to Meta or Dolly and even create your own AIs. You can contact me at elliesberlinkey.com. I will have my slides available there shortly, and I'll also link to an updated library guide that I'm working on with live demos, videos. I didn't want to include them in this presentation, not only for time, but for the screen sharing aspect of things. And that's a wrap.
All right, thank you so much, Elle. I think the only question we had during was to share the slides. So I went ahead and I did share the link to your website, so they will be there shortly, as Elle said. Any other questions? Please feel free to put it in the chat now. We've just got a couple minutes left, or you want to raise your hand, I'll mute you. Something in the Q&A. What AI tool do you use for creating study guides for students?
I think study guides are most effective when they're customized with content. I think this is what I so strongly recommend and an advocate for OER in classrooms. So I like to use Notebook LM. You can upload any of your readings or the PDF of your book, and you can have those automatic study guides generated not only from a tutorial that exists automatically in Notebook LM. If you click the help button, there's a little magic icon there. That's like a little star. They call it the magic icon. And it pops up with a couple of items already that says, hey, do you want a fact? Do you want to develop a prompt back and forth, a dialogic conversation? Do you want to make a study guide? So I find that very helpful. Most AI tools, the way I typically teach them, you will get a lot more value out of them, not only from the personal security and data privacy aspect of it, but if you actually include and train them on specific sources. If you just, go out to, let's say, ChatGPT, out in the wild, I typically find that the results are suboptimal. There's other apps you can use. Magic School is a great one. And I also recommend faculty use it as well. So maybe you can do some customizing and curating of study guides that you can already get from those AI tools, and then use it as an example in your class. Hope that answers your question.
All right, so we're actually unfortunately out of time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but thank you again so much, Elle, and everyone for attending.